From a boy with outstanding academic achievements who, due to school bullying, turned into a cold-blooded criminal in the future, let's follow this emotionally charged story together today. Oh, I'm Marcus Cheng, a retired police officer and your lovable storyteller. True crime case: the profession of robbery. Under the crimson glow of sunset, Sham Shui Po appeared like a tranquil painting. The shabby rooftops nestled beside the rice fields, where the wind gently sang through the trees. In this rural area, people lived simple lives day after day, filled with sweat and smiles. No one ever imagined that the shadow of crime could creep into this place, into this very small village. But fate always has its way of drawing unexpected lines. In a clay-walled house at the end of a dirt path, a story was quietly beginning. The faint scent of smoke drifted from the kitchen, blending with the sound of a mother softly lulling her child to sleep. There, a family lived. And within that family was a boy, carrying a dark destiny that no one could have foreseen. The boy's father was a learned man who had once walked the halls of faraway universities, now returned to his hometown. He believed that his son, the boy with the shy smile, would be the one to draw a bright future for the family. Listening to his father's words, the boy studied diligently. With jet black hair and bright eyes, he quickly became the pride of the household. At school, his name always topped the list of outstanding students. Teachers smiled every time he raised his hand, and classmates looked at him with a mix of admiration and envy. That hard work kept him among the school's elite students, his name called by the teachers in every exam cycle. His classmates marveled at him, some with jealousy, but he only smiled, his eyes shining with the belief that he could be different. Inside, he dreamed of a grand future, one where he would no longer be the poor village boy. And no one, not even himself, knew that his life would soon take a fateful turn. Entering middle school, he maintained his academic excellence. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the classroom window, he accidentally found an old book fallen under a desk. Its cover was worn and torn, but the title, Ode to Gallantry, seemed to call out to him. He opened it, and the world within the pages instantly swallowed him whole. Stories of martial artists, swordsmen, and feuds stirred something inside him. At first, he read secretly at night, but soon he began reading during class. He was no longer the obedient boy of before. In his mind, dreams began to flicker not of grades or praise, but of a free life, where he could wield a sword and shape his own destiny. What seemed like a harmless interest was, in fact, a small crack in the perfect wall his father had built. That first book led him to others. He scoured second-hand book markets, trading away his allowance for thick martial arts novels. Each day, he dove into worlds of fierce battles, where wandering heroes roamed the land and avenged evil with cold steel. The pages soaked in blood and fire made his heart race, as if he were living it himself. He began to imagine himself as a wandering swordsman, walking the line between good and evil. These stories slowly embedded themselves in his mind, planting the seeds of a dangerous desire to truly live like a martial houndbound, fearless. Neither his parents nor he himself noticed that he was gradually drifting away from reality, letting his soul be swept away by the stormy rivers of the martial world. He no longer cared for school books. One day, when upperclassmen cornered him in the schoolyard and mocked him as a hard-working country bumpkin, he didn't lower his head like before. Instead, he looked up, a strange spark of anger in his eyes. Without fear, he challenged them to meet him at the empty lot after school. That afternoon changed the life of the once exemplary boy forever. Seeing his defiant stance, the upperclassmen furiously rushed at him. They grabbed bricks and, without a word, started beating him. One hit struck his head sharp pain, blood trickling from his brow. But he didn't fall, didn't cry out. He stood there, silently taking the blows, his gaze unwavering. The bullies expected him to collapse, but the more they hit, the stranger it felt didn't back down. Gritting his teeth, blood running down his cheek, his hands clenched tighter, as if the pain only made him stronger. His endurance started to shake their confidence. Amid the chaos, his mind remained eerily clear. Surrounded by the gang, bricks flying, he wasn't scared. His eyes scanned their faces and stopped at the tallest boy, the leader. He knew that to win, he had to take down the strongest. Though blood blurred one of his eyes, he saw clearly. That boy stood slightly behind, smirking, thinking himself safe. Inside, a voice whispered, "If you take him down, everything changes." He pressed his lips together, eyes burning with resolve. They didn't know that in that very moment, he had become someone willing to do anything, to rise above them all. Without a second's hesitation, he charged at the leader like an arrow. The others froze, too stunned to react, and in an instant, he was face to face with his target. His fist clenched, his eyes cold, with no hint of doubt. He threw a powerful punch, not giving his opponent any chance to strike back. A blow to the head then, one to the chest, brutal, decisive, as if all the fury of years of humiliation burst forth at once. The leader roared, but the cry quickly faded. He didn't stop no mercy. Inside, he felt a strange satisfaction, as if each punch declared, "I'm not weak." The rest of the gang stood frozen, bricks falling from their hands. To him, this wasn't just revenge, it was his way of proving he could make others afraid. The gang leader collapsed, his face drenched in blood after a fatal blow. That final strike, precise and merciless, took him down instantly. The boy stood there, panting, his eyes still sharp and cold. He no longer felt the pain from the wounds on his body, only a strange mixture of emptiness and exhilaration. He stared at the unmoving figure of the leader, blood pooling beneath him, yet felt no guilt, no fear. What he felt was power and unfamiliar, intoxicating strength he never knew he possessed. The others screamed, but none dared step forward. He pressed his lips together, a glint of triumph in his eyes. To him, this wasn't just a victory, it was the first time he tasted true dominance, the kind born of ruthlessness. He stood tall, silent, but deep down he knew everything had changed. With their leader gone, the others retreated and ran off. After that fight, the name Chu Kak Hoa spread throughout the school like a warning. No one dared to lay a hand on him anymore. The older students who once mocked him now lowered their heads and avoided him whenever he passed. His cruelty and defiance had carved a permanent impression into everyone's minds, turning him into someone truly fearsome. This was the first sign of his descent into darkness. His grades plummeted to alarming levels, and when the high school entrance exams came, the results were no surprise. He failed. The door to education slammed shut in his face, leaving behind a cold, empty void. Left with no other options, he dropped out and began working at a sand mining site near the village. The work was grueling and filthy. It seemed his life would slip into monotony, but fate had other plans. The mining site was suddenly sold, and he was tossed out jobless, futureless. Under the gray skies of Sham Shui Po, he sat in silence like a shadow, his mind tangled in complex thoughts. During the days of unemployment, a fire reignited within him stronger than ever. He refused to accept a life of poverty, endlessly repeating the same meaningless days. The martial arts tales he once read now became a torch, lighting his path. We wanted to leave this place, to find a bigger world where he could live freely, indulge in luxury. Every night, He dreamed of cities glittering with lights. With each passing day, his desire to escape the countryside grew stronger. But that very longing was about to lead him down a dark path. In 1993, he left Sham Shui Po with a few sets of clothes and burning dreams. The city of Hong Kong welcomed him with bustling streets, blinding neon lights, and blaring horns. Among the glitz and glamour, he was a nobody, no money, no job. He wandered through noisy markets, slept in dark alleyways, living like a shadow among strangers. Every day, he observed the city with hungry eyes. One afternoon, as the sunlight faded on the streets, he stopped in front of a large bank. People came and went, holding thick stacks of cash, making his heart race. He stood there, eyes glued to the glass doors, unaware that he had lingered too long. His suspicious behavior caught the eye of a passerby. Minutes later, a police siren pierced the air. He jolted, but it was too late. Figures in blue uniforms were closing in, their sharp eyes locked onto him. The police surrounded him in front of the bank. "What are you doing here?" one officer barked, his hand resting on his holster. He stood still, lips pressed tight, trying to appear calm. But his shifty eyes betrayed his unease. "What are you hiding in your coat?" "Take it out now," a second officer demanded, stepping closer. A crowd began to gather, whispering among themselves. He knew he couldn't run. Slowly, his hand slipped into his coat. His heart pounded, sweat trailing down his forehead. The impatient officer yanked open his coat. A glint of metal flashed in the sunlight, a hunting rifle. He was slammed to the ground, hands cuffed behind his back. "You've got some nerve," the officer growled. He said nothing, head lowered, but inside was a storm of frustration and rage. The two officers immediately escorted him to the station, charged with illegal possession of a weapon. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The prison with its gray walls and the clanking of iron doors became his new home. There, he learned the harsh rules of the underworld, where the strong ruled and the weak bowed. During those long nights in his cell, he didn't regret anything. On the contrary, his thirst for power only grew stronger. 2 years later, he was released. Thinner, but with eyes sharp as blades. He didn't return to Sham Shui Po. He didn't seek out his parents. Instead, he headed straight to the Yunnan border. There, dusty trails led to black markets where everything had a price, even a human life. He moved silently through the crowds, ears tuned to every whisper about illegal arms. One moonless night, in a shadowy alley, he met a smuggler with a crooked smile. "Looking for a gun, kid?" the man asked, eyes narrowing. He nodded and handed over the last of his money. The man shoved a small handgun into his palm, cold and heavy. As his fingers touched the metal, a chill ran down his spine. This was what he had dreamed of, the tool that would turn his outlaw fantasies into reality. With the gun in hand, he turned it over like it was a treasure. The polished metal gleamed in his eyes. He was no longer the promising student of the past, but someone ready to embrace the darkness. He smirked a smile, both satisfied and dangerous. In that moment, he felt true power. He didn't yet know that by holding it, his hands were about to be stained with blood and sin. In 2004, the midday sun bathed the bustling streets of Hong Kong, where streams of people wove past one another like threads in a loom. In front of a major bank, 2 women stepped out, each carrying a bulging black bag. They were accounting staff from a hotel, having just withdrawn a large sum of cash to settle some bills. Their light laughter drifted through the air, unaware that death was lurking nearby. Just a few meters away, hidden in the shadow of an old delivery truck, he stood still, eyes sharp as a hawk. He had been watching this bank for a week, memorizing every detail, the schedule, the entrances, the peak foot traffic. His hands clenched tightly in his coat pockets, feeling the cold metal of the gun. He wasn't in a rush. The perfect moment was drawing near. As the two women headed toward the car parked by the curb, his heart beat faster, yet his mind remained cold and calculating. The two women stopped by the vehicle. One reached to open the door, while the other casually looked around, oblivious to the shadow rapidly closing the distance. He had chosen this precise moment when the crowd was thickest to mask his actions. Everything unfolded in a flash. Just as the woman's hand touched the door handle, he slipped silently from his spot, his steps as quiet as a cat's, blending into the crowd without taking his eyes off the target. No one noticed the ordinary man in a worn-out jacket. He stopped just a few steps behind them, his right hand slowly reaching into his coat. Time seemed to slow. The sounds of traffic and conversation faded from his ears, replaced only by the steady beat of his heart and the chill of the metal weapon. Like a predator striking, he lunged from the side of the vehicle so quickly that no one had time to react. The surrounding pedestrians continued their routines, unaware that the scythe of death had been unsheathed. He said nothing, gave no warning, revealed no signs. Every fiber of his being was focused on one action. His hand drew the gun from his coat with a smooth motion, as though he'd practiced it hundreds of times. The metallic glint flashed in the sunlight, and before anyone could scream, he pulled the trigger. The deafening crack of gunfire tore through the air, echoing across the crowded street. The bullet hit the woman closest to him squarely in the head, the force knocking her to the ground. Blood pooled across the pavement, deep crimson in the sunlight. Panic erupted among the crowd, but he didn't stop. His eyes remained cold, unwavering as if his heart had long since turned to stone. The first woman collapsed, her eyes wide with shock, not a sound escaping her lips. Blood flowed from the wound, soaking the bag she still clutched. He didn't look at her, didn't care about the life he had just extinguished. It was merely part of the plan. The crowd began to scream, footsteps scattered in chaos. Yet he remained eerily calm. The second woman, just a few steps away, stood frozen, her hands trembling, mouth agape as if to scream, yet her voice was strangled by terror. She hadn't even grasped what was happening before. She saw his figure turn, his eyes as cold as a blade. He raised the gun again, and his finger tightened on the trigger. The second shot rang out dry and final. The bullet pierced the woman's head, and she crumpled beside her colleague. The bag of money rolled onto the sidewalk. 2 lives were snuffed out in mere seconds. Even before the smoke from the barrel had cleared, he bent down to pick up the bag. His fingers brushed across the coarse, blood-soaked fabric, but he didn't care. He quickly grabbed it and fled. Like a ghost, he melted into the crowd, his steps blending with the chaos of fleeing pedestrians. The gun was hidden back inside his coat, the bag of money pressed tightly to his chest. He moved quickly, but not hastily, each step measured to avoid drawing attention. Within minutes, he had vanished into a narrow alleyway, leaving behind a blood-soaked scene and the sound of sobbing cries. The police would come, but he knew they'd find nothing, just 2 corpses and an unsolvable mystery. In a dimly lit hotel room, the yellow glow of the light cast flickering shadows on the peeling walls. He slammed the door shut, his breath still ragged from the heist. The bloodied money bag weighed heavy in his hand, as if it carried the weight of the world. He stepped toward the rickety bed and emptied the contents. Bills scattered across the sheets. The crinkling sound of paper filled the room, mixing with his pounding heartbeat. He stood there, eyes gleaming, gazing at the spread of money on the bed. The scent of ink mingled with blood created a sickly euphoria that consumed the room. He didn't think of the 2 women lying dead. didn't care about the screams from the street. To him, this was his first trophy. A cold smile crept across his face as if to confirm. This bloody path was the one he was meant to walk. He sat down, hands trembling as he sifted through the pile of cash, bill by bill, as if confirming they were real. He counted, slowly, carefully, his eyes lighting up with each growing total. 70,000 Hong Kong dollars, a sum he had never dared to dream of. He sat in a daze, staring at the money like it was some kind of miracle. In Sham Shui Po, that amount could buy a home. He lay back on the bed, letting the bills cover his chest, the cool touch of the paper making his heart pound harder. That night, he didn't sleep. The money still lay on his chest, glinting under the dim light. He replayed the heist in his mind each moment, clear as day. The terrified eyes of the women, the crack of gunfire, the bag falling to the ground. It had all taken just seconds, and yet it had brought him more money than he'd ever seen. He laughed hoarsely, a dry, raspy sound. Was it really that easy? He mumbled to himself, as if questioning his own reality. No need for education, no more slaving away at a job like his father had forced him to. All it took was a gun, a decisive moment, and the money was his. That thought was like a sharp blade slicing through the last remnants of his morality. He was no longer the boy from Sham Shui Po, was now someone willing to do anything to get what he wanted. And he wanted more. 70,000 Hong Kong dollars, though significant, wasn't enough. He began to dream of bigger scores, bolder heists. Greed, like a wildfire, ignited inside him unstoppable. He stared at the gun, his mind swirling with new plans. Just one more time, he told himself. But deep down, he knew he couldn't stop. Every bill on the bed was both a promise and a trap. He looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the vast city beyond, where more banks were waiting. However, after the first robbery went off without a hitch, he didn't rush into making another mistake. He understood that the police were hunting him down, and one careless move could destroy everything. He melted into the shadows of Hong Kong, living in cheap rental rooms, avoiding all prying eyes. For a whole year, he left no trace, vanished, as if he'd never existed. The stolen money was hidden with care, enough for him to survive without exposing himself. But during those long nights, as the city slept, he continued sharpening his next plan. He replayed every detail in his head. The approach, the execution, the escape. His gun, the only companion he had, was cleaned every night, its metallic gleam fueling his anticipation for the next job. By 2005, when the summer heat blanketed the streets, he knew the moment had come. He stood up, eyes sharp and cold, ready for a bolder heist. He appeared in front of a bank in the suburbs of Hong Kong, looking like a harmless vagabond. An old, worn-out coat concealed his figure as he sat on a nearby bench, his eyes absent-mindedly following the crowd. But beneath that ordinary facade was a sharp mind, analyzing every detail. He memorized every face going in and out of the bank, every car that pulled over, every anxious glance of those carrying heavy bags. He observed the guards changing shifts, the way the glass doors opened and closed. Every tiny movement was registered like a patient hunter waiting for prey. He sat there for hours, blending into the surroundings, unnoticed, just a man with dust-covered shoes. But in his mind, the plan had already crystallized. The perfect time to strike, the escape route, the way to erase all traces. He wasn't in a rush, because he knew a single mistake could bring everything crashing down. As the sun tilted westward, he stood up, a flicker of determination flashing in his eyes. The perfect prey was about to appear. He stood a few meters from the bank, eyes sweeping the crowd like a hawk. Then he saw them. A man and a woman stepping out, one holding a black bag, the other walking close beside, a flicker of anxiety in their eyes. They were financial officers from a large company, having just withdrawn a massive amount of money. He recognized the opportunity instantly. His heart pounded, but his mind remained ice cold. He left his spot, trailing behind them at a measured pace, keeping just enough distance to avoid suspicion. The crowd unwittingly served as his cover, traffic noise drowning out his footsteps. He noted every movement, how they gripped the bag tightly, how they hurried toward a parked car. No one noticed the quiet man following them, eyes sharp as blades. In his mind, everything was set. Just a few more seconds, and the bag would be his. He clenched his hand in his coat pocket, feeling the cold metal of the gun, and smiled the smile of a predator who had locked onto his target. The two of them briskly passed through the bank gate, unaware that death was stalking them. Their footsteps clacked against the pavement, blending with the city's noise. He followed, maintaining the perfect distance, eyes fixed on the black bag. As they exited the doors, he knew the time had come. He picked up speed, his steps light like a phantom, brushing past a pedestrian without drawing attention. The crowd remained oblivious. No one saw the man closing the gap. His hand was already in his coat, thumb resting on the trigger, the cold metal seeping into his skin. Time slowed. The noise of the city faded from his ears, only his heartbeat and the two figures ahead remained. He surged forward, blocking their path in a blur of motion, silent and precise. Without hesitation or hesitation in his gaze, he drew the gun with smooth, practiced motion. Two sharp, dry gunshots shattered the midday air. Two bullets pierced straight into their heads, blood splattering across the pavement, staining the bag the woman clutched tightly. The victims collapsed instantly, not even uttering a sound. The nearby crowd screamed in panic, but he didn't flinch. His eyes remained cold, focus unbroken, a machine programmed only to kill. He quickly reached for the money bag, the heavy weight making his heart race. The two were down, blood pooling on the pavement, but before he could flee, a figure suddenly appeared. A man stood right in front of him, eyes wide with terror. He had seen everything the first shot to the moment the bodies hit the ground. The crowd continued to scream, but this man was frozen, feet rooted in place, mouth agape, but unable to speak. He paused for just a second, his sharp eyes scanning the man's face. He sensed the danger this witness had seen his face, had burned his image into memory. The world around him seemed to freeze, city noises muffled. He tightened his grip on the gun, thumb ready on the trigger. The man trembled, but had no time to react. To him, this wasn't a human being, just a threat that needed to be erased. No words were spoken, only the sound of an imminent gunshot. Without hesitation, he raised the gun, the metallic glint flashing under the noon sun. The man flinched, hands raised in a pleading gesture, but it was too late. A third shot rang out, dry and final. The bullet tore through the man's head, sending him crashing backward. He didn't look back, didn't care about the dying eyes of the witness. The crowd was now in total chaos, screams drowning out car horns, but he stayed calm. Clutching the money bag tightly, he strode past horrified faces, steps quick but measured. He knew the police were on their way, but he had memorized every twisted alley in the area. Just seconds later, he slipped into a dark alley, his figure vanishing as if he'd never been there. Behind him, 3 corpses lay cold, and a new nightmare began to haunt the city. After the heist, he didn't dare linger in the city for long. The wail of police sirens echoed in the distance, and he knew he had to disappear before the noose tightened. He ran from the scene, heading for the only place in mind, a graveyard behind the mountain where no one dared venture. When he arrived, Weathered tombstones stood silently under the twilight, as if waiting for him. He sat behind a grave, back resting against the cold stone, and for the first time that day, he exhaled. Inside, he felt no guilt for what he'd done, only the familiar emptiness. He thought of the faces that had fallen, but they blurred in his mind like the ghosts surrounding him. He caressed the money bag, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Yet deep down, he wondered if he could keep running forever. He opened the bag packed with crisp new bills. He sat down, fingers running through stack after stack, eyes lit up like a man possessed. The rustle of banknotes drowned out even the distant police sirens echoing in his mind. He counted slowly, each number widening the grin on his face. 700,000 Hong Kong dollars, a fortune that left him stunned. He had never seen so much money, never imagined that just a few short minutes could trade for a lifetime's wealth. With that kind of cash, he could indulge for a long time without a care in the world. After the frenzy over the pile of money, he quickly regained his composure. 700,000 Hong Kong dollars was a prize, but also a danger if exposed. He knew the police were frantically searching, and Hong Kong was no longer safe. His sharp mind drew up a new plan: flee to Tuen Mun, where he could blend into the crowd and start over. He prepared carefully, bringing only a few changes of clothes and his gun. He boarded a long-distance coach, headed for Tuen Mun. He was confident the operation had gone smoothly, but fate always has a way of unraveling even the most perfect plans. Sitting on the old coach, his eyes wandered lazily out the window as the dazzling scenes of Hong Kong gradually faded into the distance. The road to Tuen Mun was still long, but he felt relieved, as if he had left all his troubles behind. He reached for the gun hidden beneath his undershirt, and only after feeling its cold metal weight did he lean back and close his eyes for a quick nap. But suddenly the coach slowed down, then came to a complete stop at an unexpected checkpoint. The shrill sound of police whistles echoed, and uniformed figures appeared, their piercing eyes scanning each passenger. He clenched his fists, trying to stay calm, but beads of sweat began to trickle down his forehead. A tall young officer with sharp eyes approached, scanning him from head to toe. "What's under your shirt? Take it out," the officer demanded. He froze. His hand trembled slightly inside his shirt, feeling the cold, hard outline of the gun. He looked at the officer, mind spinning. He could lie, but that voice, that gaze, they told him these people were not easily fooled. In his heart, he wondered if he could talk his way out of this, or if this was the moment when everything would fall apart. He pressed his lips together, slowly reaching inside not to draw the gun just yet, but to test their reaction. He knew that every passing second was a gamble, and he wasn't ready to lose. His hesitation made the officer frown. With a hand signal, the officer called over several colleagues, who quickly surrounded him in a tight circle. The other passengers began whispering, some stepping back, sensing danger. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for an opening, but there was no escape. The harsh sunlight lit up his face, exposing an uncharacteristic tension. He knew that every move from this moment on could seal his fate. Surrounded, sweat pouring down his face. After a few seconds of internal turmoil between two choices, he made his move. His hand went inside his shirt, and the gun flashed under the sunlight. His motion to draw the gun sent the passengers nearby into a panic. He was caught between two choices: fight to the death or surrender. He sat still, gun in hand, like a silent challenge, but his eyes were wavering. He knew he couldn't shoot them all, couldn't escape this circle of steel, and so he made a decision. The officers kept their weapons trained on him, their eyes never leaving his. Police commands rang out, drowning the wind on the deserted road. "Put the gun down! one officer shouted, his weapon aimed straight at him. Finally, the gun dropped to the ground with a dry, metallic clunk that echoed in the silence. He said nothing, just stood there, waiting. After he chose to disarm, a young officer cautiously stepped forward and picked up the weapon. "Hands behind your back," the officer ordered. They cuffed him and dragged him off the coach. Escorted back to the police station under watchful eyes, he remained silent, his face as cold as stone. When the vehicle stopped, he was shoved into a holding cell, the clinking of the handcuffs sounding like a bitter symphony. The officers searched him, but aside from the gun, they found no evidence linking him to the robberies. He knew that and used it to his advantage. In the interrogation room, under the harsh, sterile white light, he sat across from the officer, looking calm. "Where did you get the gun?" they asked, their tone sharp. He shrugged. "Found it." In the end, lacking evidence to charge him with robbery or murder, they only convicted him for illegal possession of a firearm. He gave a faint smile upon hearing the sentence: 3 years in prison. Though he had to endure days in a cold, dark cell, he felt no remorse. 3 years for illegal gun possession was a small price compared to what he had done. The police were suspicious, but had no solid proof to charge him with the bloody robberies. He knew the money was still safe in Hong Kong, waiting for his return. Each day he sharpened his mind, feeding an even greater hunger. He imagined the day he'd walk out of prison with a new gun and even bigger plans. The prison gate creaked open, and the scorching April 2011 sunlight hit his face. After 3 years of hard labor, he walked out not with a renewed heart, but with one hardened by time in solitary confinement. His stare was sharper than ever. He felt no remorse for the lives he had taken, no dreams of turning over a new leaf. Standing by the roadside, he watched the traffic pass, savoring the taste of freedom. A smirk tugged at his lips, a dangerous glint flashed in his eyes, and then he walked on, blending into the crowd like a ghost ready to be reborn. Back in Hong Kong, he returned to his old ways. With money left over from his last heist, he contacted a familiar arms dealer. In a clearing near the edge of a forest, the man handed him a cold, heavy handgun. He took it, his fingers brushing against the steel. Its familiar weight made his heart race. He vowed to make up for the 3 years lost behind bars with bolder, more daring robberies. Each night, he honed his plans, imagining banks, sacks of money, and the people who would fall under his barrel. With a new gun in hand, he didn't sit still for long. He started again like a predator let out of its cage. Banks across Hong Kong and nearby cities became his targets. He acted with a brutality that had become second nature. Observe, wait, strike without mercy. Each heist was ruthless. He shot without hesitation, each bullet taking a life just as easily as it stole money. Victims fell: bank employees, guards, unlucky bystanders. He didn't count the bodies or think of the pain he left behind. But what he didn't realize was that the world had changed. By then, Hong Kong's streets were lined with surveillance cameras. Quietly, they began to capture traces of him. In one suburban robbery, he failed to notice a tiny camera fixed on a lamppost, just perfectly angled to catch his face as he fled the scene. In another job at a small bank, he happened to look up just as the security camera's flash activated. Those fleeting moments, seemingly insignificant, became deadly clues. He continued his spree, leaving behind blood and terror, but also traces. The blurry footage began to tell the tale of a relentless killer. He didn't know that in the darkness he once trusted, an invisible net was closing in, waiting to drag him into the light. After multiple unsolved bloody heists, Hong Kong police finally found their first leads. They combed through hours of surveillance footage from scenes of the crimes, analyzing each frame. One blurry clip revealed his figure, the baseball cap failing to conceal his piercing eyes. Another showed how he held the gun quick, efficient, machine-like. The smallest detail she's gait, his worn-out coat slowly pieced together a clear portrait. They compared videos, connected cases, and realized these weren't isolated crimes. This was the signature of a serial killer. Finally, a clearer video from a nearby bank confirmed it. It was him. A wanted notice was immediately issued, and the whole of Hong Kong was shaken. His face lit up on large screens, and his identity was finally revealed. Zhou Hua from Sham Shui Po, Kowloon. Posters were plastered everywhere from bus stops to night markets along with a detailed description. An armed and dangerous man who kills without hesitation. The police launched a massive operation, mobilizing every resource to hunt him down. They searched every alley, checked every guest house, and interrogated anyone linked to the underworld. Zhou Hua's name became a nightmare not just for the police, but for the public. His bloody heists were no longer mysteries. They were a warning. He was still out there, hiding, ready to strike again. The manhunt didn't shake him. In 2012, he arrived in Shatina City where no one knew his face. He stood outside a small bank one late afternoon, eyes blank, but his mind constantly turning. He observed the people entering and leaving, every face a potential opportunity. As twilight fell and the last customer exited, he had already chosen his target. A well-dressed woman stepped out of the bank. She seemed to be the final customer of the day. In her hand was a canvas bag, her steps calm and deliberate. He stood a few meters away, appearing as just another passerby. But his eyes never left her, noting every detail. How she clutched the bag, how she glanced around. He didn't know who she was and didn't care. He followed silently, blending into the early evening crowd. He didn't think of her family or what she would lose. All he saw was the alley she was heading toward and the cold steel in his coat pocket. As she turned into the alley, he moved behind her, a shadow beneath the fading sunlight. Then he acted, no hesitation, no thought. He drew the gun, and the shot rang out brief and chilling. The bullet pierced her head, dropping her instantly, the bag falling, blood spreading on the ground. He stood over her for a second, emotionless. No regret, no sorrow. He bent down, picked up the bag, his fingers brushing the still warm fabric. He didn't think of her, didn't reflect on what he had done. He walked away, blending into the nearby street crowd as if he had never been there. Police sirens wailed across Sha Tin just minutes after the murder. Every exit from the city was locked down as if the authorities had been waiting. Train stations were packed with people being screened. The airport lit up with security lights, and the railway stations buzzed with tension. He knew they were looking for him, but he wasn't scared. He was used to being hunted. Sitting in a shabby tea shop on the outskirts, he stared out the window, his gaze empty. Police set up checkpoints on every road leading out of Sha Tin. Vehicles lined up, drivers were questioned, and luggage was searched. They scrutinized every face, comparing them with his portrait, but no one had seen him. The police continued their search every day. Suspecting he would try to escape the area, they checked every car leaving the city, but there was still no trace of him. So where was the criminal Zhou Hua hiding? He had slipped into a dark corner on the outskirts of the city. He thought about the previous robberies, about the faces that had fallen. He didn't see them in his dreams, didn't feel guilty. He knew the police were tightening the net, but he wasn't afraid. He had survived many manhunts before, and this time would be no different. He stroked his gun, his eyes glinting with a hint of defiance. Believing he hadn't left the city, the police changed tactics. They broadcast his image across all media channels. Television, newspapers, social media. Armed and dangerous murderer, they warned. accompanied by a call for citizens to report any information. Flyers with his face were plastered all over the streets of Sha Tin. The police wanted to catch him, but he wasn't running. He was simply waiting for the next opportunity. One day, a tip-off from a local resident ignited a frenzy in the Sha Tin Police Department. Someone reported seeing a suspicious man, matching the wanted description, lurking in the remote mountains on the outskirts. Police immediately launched a manhunt, deploying dozens of officers and sniffer dogs. They sealed off all entrances to the mountainous area, dense with trees and winding trails. The police pushed deeper into the mountains and, in an abandoned cemetery, they discovered signs of activity: disturbed earth, a few broken twigs, and a tattered shirt buried in the bushes. Someone had spent the night here. He didn't realize he had left behind such small clues while resting overnight. Now, investigators knelt down, shining flashlights on every trace, their eyes sharp as hunters. They didn't speak much, only whispered to one another with certainty. He had been here and he hadn't gone far. Not far from the cemetery, the police unearthed a buried pile of household waste: crushed beer cans, crumpled cigarette packs, and a few pieces of dry bread. He had tried to erase the evidence, but not thoroughly enough. After analyzing the trash, the officer's eyes lit up. He was close. That night, an emergency meeting was held. Based on the evidence at the cemetery and the trash site, they concluded that he had abandoned any vehicle and was traveling on foot through the mountains to avoid checkpoints. It was a clever move. He knew train stations and airports were under lockdown, and vehicles were no longer safe. With maps spread out and determination in their eyes, the police began dividing into teams, following his trail. They knew he couldn't run forever, and the day of reckoning was near. Based on the gathered evidence, the police speculated that he had returned to Hong Kong, a city he knew like the back of his hand. After days hiding in the wilderness, he had blended back into the crowds like a ghost. He rented a small apartment on the outskirts and lived quietly. Using his stolen money, he began a life of luxury. He bought expensive clothes, dined at upscale restaurants, and gambled recklessly in casinos. In a dimly lit bar in Hong Kong, he met Zhang Man Yi, a sharp-smiled hostess with seductive eyes. She was different from the women he had known, unafraid, unfazed by his cold demeanor. They talked, laughed, and before long, she became a part of his life. They moved in together in his apartment. To him, she was a temporary escape from loneliness. He liked how she didn't ask too many questions. Slowly, the two were drawn to each other. Man Yi was not one to overlook details. She noticed he never went to work, yet he never lacked money. He bought her dresses, took her to fancy restaurants, and always paid with thick stacks of cash. One evening, as the apartment lights dimmed and she lay beside him, her eyes curious, she asked, half jokingly, "What do you do to have so much money?" He looked at her without blinking, his mind turning. He could leave, but this time he didn't want to. The truth, to him, was a test to see if she was like the others, ready to run once she knew who he really was. He knew the answer would change everything, but he wanted to see her reaction. Taking a drag from his cigarette, he spoke in a cold voice. "I'm a murderer and a thief," he said evenly, as if recounting an ordinary tale. "Are you scared?" He looked straight into Man Yi's eyes, expecting panic, but it never came. She only tilted her head and smiled, a strange glint in her eyes. "Like one of those heroes in old legends," she replied, half joking, though he could sense the truth in her words. She wasn't afraid, she was intrigued. He smirked, a mix of relief and surprise washing over him. He had never imagined anyone could accept the real him. "When I've stolen enough 1 million yuan, he continued, his voice dropping lower, "I'll stop. We'll go somewhere far away and live in peace." He didn't know if he truly believed that, but in this moment he wanted her to. That night, their bodies intertwined. They truly understood each other for the first time. He used the stolen money to satisfy Man Yi's material desires. He bought her expensive handbags, sparkling shoes, and took her to luxurious places. Watching her try on new dresses, her face glowing with delight, gave him a fleeting sense of warmth, but it always dissolved quickly, giving way to the familiar emptiness. He knew the money was stained with blood, that every bill cost a life. Sometimes, while she slept, he'd sit by the window, staring out at the city, wondering if she really understood him. He didn't love her, not quite, but he needed her. He needed someone to fill the void he couldn't bear to face alone. His hand would often drift to the gun hidden in the drawer, eyes gleaming, fully aware that the 1 million yuan was nothing more than an empty promise, and the path he was on had no exit. The money slipped through his fingers like sand. Lavish gifts for his lover, nights of heavy drinking in bars, and reckless gambling drained his stolen fortune. He sat in his apartment, surrounded by mounting bills. He couldn't return to the days of poverty, couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes. He picked up the gun, caressing the cold metal. He wasn't thinking about the lives he'd take or the police on his trail. All he saw was the next bag of cash, his eyes glowing like a starving animal's. One day, he left the apartment, eyes cold, steps determined. He didn't tell her, but in his heart, he knew. Another bank, another heist under the cold mouth of his gun was about to unfold. Once, after hitting a small bank in Hong Kong, he brought Man Yi to the scene. They stood a short distance away, hidden among the curious crowd. He held her hand, his eyes fixed on the spot where the body had been taken away, where the blood had dried on the pavement. She stared at the scene with curiosity more than fear, and he felt a strange satisfaction. He wondered if she truly belonged in his world, or if she was just a temporary traveler passing through. He didn't love her, but he needed her there to witness what he had done. Watching the police bustle around the scene, collecting evidence of the crime, he stood just a few meters away, hands in his pockets, eyes flashing with contempt. He saw them stoop down, picking up fragments, whispering about clues, and he wanted to laugh. He tightened his grip on Man Yi's hand, feeling her warmth, but his eyes never left the officers. He didn't think about getting caught, didn't think about the lives already lost. All he saw was their helplessness, and it made him feel more alive than ever. He turned away, pulling her with him, his steps light, as if he had never been there at all. He always believed he could vanish forever, that no one sharp enough could ever spot him in a crowd. But on a bright day, at the end of 2012, under the lights of a commercial district in Hong Kong, his luck began to crack. He moved through the crowd with a wandering gaze. He didn't know that a young couple had stopped in their tracks upon seeing him. His face, though partially hidden under a cap, was disturbingly familiar. Inside him, confidence still ruled. He believed himself a ghost, invisible in this world. But he didn't see the wife's anxious glance or hear the husband's whisper. The husband held his wife's hand tightly, eyes locked on the man ahead. "Hey, I think that's the wanted guy," he whispered, voice trembling but resolute. The man continued walking, melting into the shopping crowd, unaware that he had been recognized. In his mind, only vague plans for the next heist existed. He didn't look back, didn't see the couple exchange looks, didn't see the wife nod, her hand trembling as she reached for her phone. He thought of Man Yi, of her smile when receiving gifts, and told himself everything was still under control. The couple trailed him quietly, keeping a safe distance. The husband's grip was tight, his eyes tense but never leaving the man. They passed brightly lit shops and whispered urgently into the phone, calling the police. The man kept walking steadily, eyes scanning the crowd out of habit. He drifted through thoughts of the past close calls, near captures. But the sharpened instinct of a seasoned criminal made him cautious. He suddenly turned, eyes sharp as blades aimed directly at the couple. He had sensed them, the sneaky glances, the hesitant steps. He stood still, his gaze fierce as a predator sensing danger. The husband froze, clutching his wife's hand, while the wife nearly stopped breathing. He said nothing, but his stare was a silent threat. "Don't come closer." Rage flared inside him, but he restrained it. He knew any rash move would destroy everything. He thought of Man Yi, of the apartment where she waited, and told himself he could still escape. He turned away, walking faster. His lips pressed tight, hand clenched around the gun in his pocket, ready for whatever came next. The couple stood frozen, their hearts pounding as his gaze moved away. Fear weighed down their legs like lead, leaving them unable to move. They looked at each other, eyes full of tension, and decided to stop. The wife whispered, "We can't take the risk anymore." They remained there, amidst the shopping crowd, a mix of helplessness and relief washing over them. He had exited the mall, his silhouette fading behind the glass doors. But the couple didn't give up completely. They called the police again, voices trembling but resolute, reporting the direction he had gone. In their hearts, part of them feared he might return, but another part knew they had done the right thing. He, now walking swiftly down the bustling street, had eyes that sparkled with suspicion. He didn't know he had been spotted, but instinct told him to move faster as if fleeing from his own shadow. He thought about all the times he had escaped before and told himself this would be no different. But deep inside, a seed of doubt began to grow. As soon as he vanished, 2 plainclothes officers appeared at the mall, their sharp eyes scanning the crowd. The couple approached them, hurriedly recounting everything: his face, the terrifying look in his eyes, and the direction he had gone. The husband pointed toward the main entrance, describing the worn-out jacket and the cap he wore. The officers nodded, one hand on the radio, reporting quickly to the patrol team. They sensed a chance, however, slim. By now, he was far away, blending into the stream of people on the busy street. The 2 officers bolted in the direction the couple had indicated, their radios crackling with brief commands. Not far ahead, he turned into a narrow alley, his heart racing as the sense of danger solidified. The alley, dim and stained, was a place he had once used to hide, but this time it felt like a trap. His hand clenched inside his jacket pocket, touching the cold metal of his gun. He reassured himself that he could still escape, just like all the times before. At the mouth of the alley, the 2 officers appeared, their shadows cast under the pale streetlight. He realized he'd been exposed when a voice shouted from the end of the alley, "Stop, right there!" With no way out, he spun around, drawing his gun with the speed of someone far too familiar with it. The first shot rang out sharp and echoing between the narrow walls. The officers immediately fired back, bullets slicing through the air, sparking off the bricks. The gunfight lasted only minutes. 2 bullets struck his shoulders, burning like fire, and then another hit his chest, sending him staggering. He collapsed, blood soaking his shirt in dark red. Lying there, he looked up at the black sky through the alley's narrow gap, his breaths growing shorter. Flashes of memory surged through his mind. Man Yi's face, the corpses he'd left behind, the stacks of money that once made him feel invincible. He felt no remorse, but for the first time, he felt tired. The gunfire faded. All he could hear was his slowing heartbeat then. Nothing. Silence swallowed everything. That day, after 8 years of hiding and killing, he fell in a narrow alleyway in Hong Kong. He had committed dozens of robberies, killing 9 people. His name, though no one wished to say, it was etched into the city's memory. The 2 officers approached, their eyes tense yet relieved, staring at his lifeless body. He was no longer a threat. He had lived like a phantom, but in the end, he was only human flesh and blood no match for bullets. The people of Hong Kong finally breathed a sigh of relief. The terrifying figure who haunted their nights was gone. As the news spread, people said that evil had finally been punished. The bullets from the officers' guns had ended a soul they deemed wicked. In that alley, as blood poured from his chest, he didn't curse the police. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply looked up at the sky, his eyes fading, and accepted it. People would remember him as a monster, but he didn't care. He had lived by his own rules, even if they were soaked in blood and loneliness. The police retrieved his gun, sealed off the scene, and left in silence. To them, it was a victory for justice. Under the dim streetlight, the alley returned to quiet as if it had never witnessed the end of a nightmare. The case of Zhouwa was closed, a final period on an 8-year-long page. Police held a press conference, announcing that the threat was over, that Hong Kong could sleep peacefully once more. Citizens gathered around their televisions, whispering about the criminal who had cast a shadow over the city for years. In a small apartment, Zhang Manyi sat quietly, staring at the gifts he had once bought her. She said nothing. She didn't cry, but her eyes were hollow, as if something inside her had vanished. To the police, this was the culmination of tireless effort. To the people, it was peace at last. But as for him, no one knew what he was thinking when he closed his eyes. He had lived in darkness. He died in darkness. His life was now only a memory. But that memory would never fade.